Welcome to Meet the Bloggers. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur. Well, now that Barack Obama's been elected president, all our problems are solved, right? Like, for example, the death penalty. It's taken care of. No more death penalty. Oh, wait, it's still around? That's interesting. Well, of course, we didn't expect change that quickly, but the death penalty is a real significant issue today, and we're going to see how much we can tackle it going forward. And in a country this civilized, I hope, you would think that practice this barbaric and inhumane wouldn't happen, but it still does. And our guest today says that it's time to end the death penalty right now. In fact, he's in the studio right here. He's actor and activist Mike Farrell. He is, of course, best known as B.J. Honeycutt from the television show MASH. Mike also works tirelessly on behalf of social justice issues and is currently the president of the group Death Penalty Focus. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Thank you, Cenk. Nice to see you.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
And also joining us is Liliana Segura from Alternet in New York. And Liliana, of course, is the rights and liberties blogger at Alternet. And she joins us again as well. Welcome, Liliana.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for coming. Mike, I want to get into what's happening today with the death penalty, some of the cases Liliana's going to talk about, and what Obama can do. But first, I want to kind of set it up. What do you think are the three biggest myths about the death penalty?
Well, it's hard to pin down three. American people don't know that we're the only Western developed nation that still uses the death penalty. They believe it's safe, that it's effective, that it's efficiently and fairly implemented. They believe that it's a deterrent. They believe all these things. They believe that it's cheaper than keeping people in prison, all of which are not true.
I really hope that we're not basing the decision based on it's cheaper to kill people, but you know, politics being what it is, I'm probably mistaken about that. But how many people are on death row right now, all across the country?
Across the country, about 3,300.
3,300. And how many on federal death row?
I believe it's under 100, about 80.
About 80 or so. Now, when Obama steps into office, is there something he can do about that? Leaving aside for the moment whether he will, okay, but is there something he could do if he wanted to?
Well, sure. If he wanted to, he could commute all the sentences to life without parole, for example, which is within the chief executive's power, not only the federal government, but any state. I think the most important thing he can do is appoint an attorney general who is going to be more thoughtful, more humane about the use of the law, and in this case, the use of the death penalty. Because the death penalty in the federal government suffers from the same problems as does the one in the states: racism, inappropriate application, all of the things that...
But Obama wouldn't know how racism would affect anybody, so...
No, how could he?
Right. Now, the Bush administration did the exact opposite, didn't they? Where they pushed with Ashcroft and Gonzalez to get more death penalty cases at the state level. How did they do that?
Well, in Mukasey too, I believe, what they did was assert the authority of the federal government to go into states, particularly states that don't have a death penalty, like Massachusetts and Vermont and some of the other 13, 14 now states that don't have a death penalty, and pick up cases that they felt were particularly, I think, politically advantageous to go for the death penalty, and apply the use of the federal law to go for death in those cases. And they did it by effectively usurping the will of the people of those states.
So they'd say, hey, we got a local murder here in Massachusetts, but we think that it has a slight national issue, so we're going to literally make a federal case out of it so we can execute the guy.
Sure.
Because the Bush administration didn't kill enough people.
Right. But when he was in Texas, he killed 152, but he wasn't satisfied with that.
Right, so he had to make it broader. Now, of course, instantly, Obama can stop that. So,
yes, now can is the operative word.
Let's talk about that. Do you think he's going to?
No, I don't think he's going to arbitrarily say there's going to be no more, but I think he can do things like, Eric Holder is on record as being opposed to the use of the death penalty. Now, if he becomes his attorney general, the possibility exists that there will be no more prosecutions of death penalty cases on the federal level. I say possibility because there are also political considerations that come to play here.
Of course. So Liliana, let me bring you in here because I know you're following a couple of cases very closely, but the issue overall as well. Before we get to the specific cases, what's your sense of Obama and Eric Holder to some degree as well? Do you think they'll work on this issue, or is that a low political priority for them and they won't really combat the death penalty?
Well, I think that for Obama himself, it's a very low priority. I mean, Obama himself is on record as being for the death penalty. And actually, I was very critical of him earlier this year. A lot of people remember at the start of the general presidential campaign, he made it a point when the Supreme Court struck down the death penalty for crimes involving child rape. Obama held a press conference during which he denounced that decision and said he was opposed to it. And while some people might consider child rape to be the kind of crime that deserves the death penalty, in reality, that position is an extremely radical one. It actually aligned him with the most far-right members, pro-death penalty members of the court, including Antonin Scalia. So Obama has made it a point to, I think, in a very politically calculating way, take a position on the death penalty where he says he supports it for the most egregious cases, despite knowing, as he surely does, how the death penalty is actually carried out. So for Obama himself, I don't think he's willing to lose any political capital by suddenly taking on the death penalty. Eric Holder's a slightly more interesting figure, and I agree. Mike is right that he's taken a position of being more critical of the death penalty, and was actually specifically critical of the Bush administration during that time when Ashcroft and subsequent attorney generals were overruling their own U.S. attorneys in order to seek death sentences at the state level, and that actually happened here in New York as well.
I think Liliana's point is a good one, but I think it's also important to recognize that what in the case of the Bayes decision, or was it the Kennedy decision, Obama's comment with regard to the child rape case was in response to a question. And in the middle of a presidential campaign, I think it would have been unwise in the extreme for him to have said a lot of things that would have been less straightforward than what he did, because he would have been attacked as being soft on crime. And the typical thing that happens when a politician, particularly in a presidential race, takes a position that they can attack. So I was disappointed in that as well, but I think you have to see it in the political equation. And I'm not quite sure, because we have to remember that when he was in the Illinois State Senate, he did help implement some laws that were very restrictive of the death penalty.
Mike, let me ask you about that, because this issue is not one that has a lot of ambiguity, because there comes a time when someone is actually going to be executed.
Yes.
And if you're the president of the United States and you can commute that sentence, and you don't, he dies.
That's right.
So the rubber hits the road. I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but there's a point where he has to make that decision. What do you think he does when he gets to that point?
Well, we have to wait and see, because who knows? But I'm going to hope for the best. I think this is a man who has demonstrated a certain character, that the kind of character that is capable of saying, this case, maybe he'll limit it to this case, has certain ameliorating factors that suggest to me that this man should, rather than be executed, spend the rest of his life in prison.
All right, now that's just a small part of it, because the federal cases, as you said, are about 80 or so, and overall we have 3,300. So this is much more of a local issue.
Much more.
So, Mike, do we have to fight this thing one state at a time? For how long? And you say about 13, 14 states don't have the death penalty. That means a great majority do.
Yes.
And so as an activist in this area, you got to go state by state and case by case and try to knock all these down?
Yes and no. I think there is a kind of overarching strategy that's taking place. There is much more linkage between the state organizations now and individuals. But you pick the cases that are most egregious to publicize, to get people's attention to. The Troy Davis case today is one that's catching a lot of attention. But I think there's great success happening, and we're seeing it all over. George Ryan in Illinois in 2003, I guess, commuted all of the people on his death row to life without parole or less, as a result of having looked at and found a system that was leaky and corrupt and simply not doing the job. And that really began a chain reaction of a lot of states creating commissions to examine their system, as Ryan had done. And the most beneficial effect of that recently was that the state of New Jersey became the first state in the modern era to do away with the death penalty just last year.
Well, that's absolutely progress. No question about that. Now, unfortunately, Liliana, there are some things we don't have progress on. You're working not only on the Troy Davis case, I've seen you write about that, but you're also writing about Montel Johnson. Let's start with Troy Davis real quick, because Mike mentioned that. What's the latest on that?
Well, Troy Davis, just to refresh people's memories, is an African-American man in Georgia who is facing execution, who has actually faced execution now 3 times in the killing of a white police officer in Savannah, Georgia. And actually, his appeal, there was a new appeal that was very unexpected that came down, which was actually heard. The oral arguments were heard yesterday. And so we're trying to see, I mean, the ultimate result could be that he could win a new trial, but Troy Davis is probably one of the most famous people on death row right now, and the real reason for that is that his case embodies many of the core problems that plague the death penalty system in this country. There was absolutely racism all throughout the case. It's a classic example: a young black man accused of killing a white police officer. The facts don't actually matter, because what happened in that case was that 7 out of the 9 eyewitnesses, this is a case that relied completely on eyewitness testimony. 7 out of the 9 eyewitnesses recanted their testimony. One of the 2 eyewitnesses who testified against him, who didn't recant, is the person that most people believe actually and claim that he gave a confession to having killed this white police officer. And so Troy Davis it's an amazing case, and I encourage people to read more about it. Amnesty International has done a lot of work on it, as has the Campaign to End the Death Penalty, which I work with. And his sister, Martina Carrera, who's a cancer survivor, has been fighting for her brother's life at the same time that she's been fighting for her own life down in Georgia. And she's just a tenacious, unbelievably strong person. So Troy Davis, we'll see what comes of this last appeal, but the ugly truth is, nobody in any country anywhere should have to come out within hours of execution 3 times. That in itself is an unbelievable example of cruel and unusual punishment.
Well, my main problem with the death penalty is that we seem to kill the wrong people every once in a while. And if I cannot believe that we live in a country where 7 out of the 9 witnesses say, no, we recant our testimony, and we still have to fight tooth and nail to make sure this guy isn't killed by the state. It's absolute madness. But real quick, tell us about Montel Johnson, too, because that's also a compelling case.
So Montel Johnson isn't a famous case at all, but it's the last case that I wrote about. And he's actually a man on Illinois, behind bars in Illinois, who is no longer on death row, but who was among the prisoners whose death sentences were commuted by Governor Ryan in 2003. And what happened in that case, it's a little bit complicated, but he was serving a life sentence in California for a crime in which they hadn't managed to successfully seek the death penalty for him. And what California did is that when it became clear that the state of Illinois, where he's from, was considering him a suspect in another murder, one that many believe he didn't commit, by the way, the state of California said to Illinois, we will send him to your state if you can promise us that you will seek and secure a death penalty for this person. And the governors drew up an agreement, an extradition agreement, and in 1999 he went to trial and was found guilty of this murder and was sentenced to death. And in 2003, when his sentence was commuted, at that point under this agreement, because he no longer faced execution, he was supposed to be sent back to California. Well, that never happened, and now what's happened is that he's been dying behind prison with multiple sclerosis and assorted other illnesses, and because he no longer faces a death sentence, now the state of California wants to send him back. This is a prisoner. If you go to Alternet, you can read this piece that I wrote, but he weighs 70 pounds, he's paralyzed, he can't move, he can't speak, and somehow, under the twisted logic that drives the death penalty in this country, the state of California still wants him back so he can finish out this life sentence he was serving. So it's really an insane case.
Mike, I want to squeeze in one last question here for you.
Sure.
Listening to Liliana spell out those cases and what the Bush administration did in pushing for more and more death penalty cases, the public still seems to have some thirst for it. And as I was telling you before we started, I saw this movie Changeling with Angelina Jolie, and in it there's literally an axe murderer who kills young kids. And in the movie, they execute him. Mm-hmm. And my main problem with the death penalty is that we're getting the wrong guys. Mm-hmm. And so it's unacceptable to do that in any way, shape, or form. But I have to confess, even I didn't mind when he was executed in the movie, and it's just a movie, right? And in the movie, we're certain it's him, right?
Yep.
But all of that leads me to the conclusion that, unfortunately, within the human nature, there seems to be this thirst for this kind of retribution. Is that something that's really hard to overcome? How do you overcome that?
Well, sure. First of all, your suggestion that we're killing the wrong people means that there are some people that we should be killing, which I disagree with. I think that we have to understand that fundamental human dignity is something that has to be honored no matter who the person is. And an axe murderer, such as you describe, is a person who's obviously mentally unbalanced, and therefore that's a sort of Nazi trick to eliminate people who are mentally ill because they're incapable of acting appropriately. The issue is public safety, and we have to make a determination as to whether or not the policies that we that we create are doing the appropriate job of keeping the public safe. And life in prison without the possibility of parole is the way in which a civilized society ought to deal with people who are incapable of behaving appropriately outside the prison walls. And that's why we continue to point out that life without parole is not only the true and appropriate ultimate sanction, it's the one that answers all the questions that you asked earlier. It does deter, it is effective, it is appropriate, it is efficient, and it doesn't capture and kill innocent people.
And it is also, in a sense, a retribution as well, because who wants to spend their life behind bars?
I can only tell you that many people on death row say they would rather die than be sentenced to life without parole.
Right. And Mike Farrell, thank you so much for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. Liliana from Alternet, thank you as always for joining us as well. Amnesty International is in the middle of the world's largest letter-writing event, the Global Write-a-thon. Blogger Birna Sabharwal from Amnesty International is going to tell us more about it and how you can get involved.
I want to tell you about a letter-writing campaign that we're doing right now called the Global Write-a-thon, where Amnesty International supporters and people who support human rights in general around the world are writing letters all at the same time on behalf of about 14 different individuals. If there's a particular issue, such as the death penalty that you care a lot about, there's probably a case that you would find inspiring. The idea behind the write-a-thon is that if so many people are writing so many letters all at the same time, it'll really create a sort of tidal wave effect that the authorities won't be able to ignore, and that will really be able to have an impact on these people's lives. If you want to participate, it's really very simple. You just have to go to www.amnestyusa.org/write-a-thon and find out about the different cases we're featuring. And we have all sorts of materials you can download. We even have sample letters if you don't feel like you're up to writing your own, and help out these individuals.
You might have heard that the Bible supports the death penalty, that whole thing about eye for an eye. But it turns out it's not quite that simple. Jonathan Kim explores this theory.
You know, one of the toughest challenges that I ever faced as a governor was carrying out the death penalty. I did it more than any other governor ever had to do it in my state. Let me tell you, it was the toughest decision I ever made as a human being.
The question was, from the viewer, was what would Jesus do? Would Jesus support the death penalty?
Jesus was too smart to ever run for public office, Anderson. That's what Jesus would do.
That was Mike Huckabee at a Republican debate explaining how an evangelical governor can preach forgiveness, compassion, and the sanctity of life while overseeing the most executions in the history of Arkansas. And wasn't it hilarious how he joked about Jesus not taking a stand against capital punishment when Jesus himself was a victim of an unjust death penalty? So evangelicals sure know comedy. There's something wildly hypocritical about religious people who claim to be pro-life. Pro as in for, life as in living thing, and yet they support ending the lives of actual living people. And technically, it shouldn't matter what a person may or may not have done. It's not called pro-good life. And even if someone commits a crime, doesn't the Bible say something in it about forgiveness? The Christian denominations that support the death penalty, like the Southern Baptist Church and other fundamentalist churches, are right in line with, you guessed it, Islam. The Quran also provides justification for capital punishment. See, who said these guys couldn't get along? Protestants, Pentecostals, and Lutherans are split among their liberal and conservative factions on the death penalty. Judaism is not opposed to capital punishment, though the Union of Orthodox Jewish Congregations of America has called for a nationwide moratorium on the death penalty because of the obvious weaknesses in our legal system. Catholics are strongly against the death penalty, and Buddhists and Hindus are against violence in any form. Curiously, the Mormon Church officially neither endorses nor opposes the death penalty. Really? They feel morally compelled to promote clear stances on caffeinated beverages and whether gay people they've never met can get married, but state-sponsored murder is one of those, different strokes for different folks kind of issues. Yes, the Bible does say an eye for an eye, which many Christians claim is justification for the death penalty, but they probably won't tell you, if they even know, that the Bible also says that working on Sunday, punching your parents, or committing adultery are crimes punishable by death. That's right, adultery. Good thing Huckabee didn't get in one of his executing moods while campaigning for good friend and noted adulterer John McCain. To learn more about the death penalty, including information on how to discuss capital punishment with your particular religious group, visit the Death Penalty Information Center at deathpenaltyinfo.org. This is Jonathan Kim for Meet the Bloggers.
As we've heard, this fight to end the death penalty is worldwide. And right now, special correspondent Axel Wolfuk is going to give us this report about the state of the death penalty in Mexico.
El número de personas asesinadas por asuntos relacionados con el narcotráfico en México en lo que va del año es de 5.400, casi el doble del 2007, y muchos más que los muertos en la guerra de Irak. Día con día se viven secuestros, balaceras y ejecuciones. Los cuerpos de víctimas quemadas y mutiladas son desechados ordinariamente en las calles de la ciudad. Ante tal escenario, el gobernador del estado fronterizo de Coahuila introdujo legislación para reinstalar la pena de muerte como castigo a secuestradores y a asesinos. Uno puede entender la indignación, el miedo y la desesperación de comunidades viviendo en dicho clima violento, pero lo que no debemos hacer es retroceder como civilización, al punto en donde la sed de venganza es mayor que la sed de justicia. El primer principio de una sociedad y su Estado es el de no colocarse al mismo nivel que sus criminales, sino efectivamente protegernos de ellos. Es indispensable que tan abominables personajes sean identificados, perseguidos, aprehendidos, llevados a juicios y castigados con severidad y sin privilegios. El problema de inseguridad en muchos países, incluyendo a México, no es debido a sus penas bajas, sino que es el resultado de la impunidad delictiva que impera. Abatir el crimen organizado es posible solamente como resultado de investigaciones profesionales, hechas por autoridades y policías capacitadas, no amafiadas con organizaciones criminales. Magisterios, jueces, juzgados, políticos, gobernadores y demás, aquellos que están encargados de sentenciar y aplicar la pena capital, usualmente son los mismos involucrados en algún nivel del crimen organizado. Reinstalando la pena de muerte bajo cualquier circunstancia es un riesgo que no vale la pena tomar. Los portadores de la fuerza legal del Estado ya pueden ejercer la violencia e incluso matar a un criminal en defensa propia, al momento de detenerlo, perseguirlo o acosarlo en cumplimiento de la ley. Pero no a sangre fría. Tal acción nunca es justificada. Amnistía Internacional ha emprendido una campaña mundial en contra de la pena de muerte, la cual consideran como un homicidio premeditado y a sangre fría a mano del Estado. Para saber cómo puede ayudar en México, Estados Unidos o alrededor del mundo, visite la página de Amnistía Internacional y haga clic en cómo puede ayudar. El aclamado escritor argentino Jorge Luis Borges alguna vez dijo: "El canibalismo es una práctica aborrecible, pero no por eso vamos a comer a los caníbales." Axel Wolfuk para Meet the Bloggers.
I'm Brian. I'm a 17-year-old high school student from the Bay Area in California. And as probably most other high school students, I use Facebook every single day. And I saw in Facebook a real opportunity to connect and mobilize students for human rights activism. Organizing is all about creating communities, and social networking sites are really made for this purpose. It's where teenagers and college students sort of create their own communities. And so it makes organizing and activism really easy. So about a year ago, I started the Amnesty International Facebook page, and since then, the page has grown to over 350,000 members who we've used to take action, write letters, organize protests. We've raised about maybe $30,000 using Facebook. I'm a 17-year-old high school student, and it's really, if there's anything that's true about social network organizing or just internet organizing in general, it doesn't take any particular skill set. The tools are available, and the tools are really easy. It's there just waiting for you to take advantage of them. We are providing some people an opportunity to do something.
Psst, do something.
Okay, see you later.
What can you do to end the death penalty? Well, there are a lot of things. Let's start with joining Death Penalty Focus or Amnesty International, the American Civil Liberties Union, Human Rights Watch, or another organization dedicated to ending the death penalty worldwide. Organize and Agitate, the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, will hold their next national conference in January in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Pass a city council resolution in your town or city calling for a moratorium on the death penalty. Find out how from Equal Justice. Go to kioti.org/EJ. Write a letter or 5 on behalf of the Global Write-a-thon. Sign up at amnestyusa.org/write-a-thon. We keep all these links and resources on our website, meetthebloggers.org. Until next time, do something.